Alright, time to finish this monster. The upper half is mostly done, now let's work on the lower half. This sequin fabric tends to stretch under the weight of itself, especially on long, heavy pieces like the skirt. I'm pinning the center back pieces up to the notch for the slit, sewing 2 lines of stitches, and then hand sewing the seam allowance to one side. I'll repeat this for the side seams. The lining is already sewn from the fit sample, so I'm going to pin them together at the waistband using actual pins. I'm not jamming the pin through the sequins when I do this, I'm wiggling the pins to find spaces between the sequins. Then I pin the skirt onto a dress form at the waist. With the sequin and lining hanging freely, you can see how much the sequin fabric is stretching. So I'm pinning at all of the edges, down center front, around the sweep, matching the side seams, then down center back and across the sweep again. Back at my table, I'm marking the lining and sequin fabrics in a few places at the center front and back to help for alignment. Since the chalk marks come off easily, I'm using safety pins to mark the sequin fabric. And I'm marking the new length of the sequin fabric about a ½ inch past where the lining is sewn, so that the sequins have some room to turn under at the hem. Now it's safe to take out all of the pins and flip the pieces so I can sew them together. I'm using real pins at the notches and wonder clips between the pins. I'm sewing the self fabric and lining together, starting at the top of the center front piece, around the sweep, and up to the center back to stop right where the center back seam ends. After that's sewn, I snip away the extra at the corners, using my thumb as a guide. Then I even cut out the seam allowance from the side seams at the hem. Now I can understitch the lining to the seam allowance all around the skirt panels and as deep into the corners as I can get. The sequin mesh doesn't really want to play nice with the lining fabric, so I've laid the skirt out on my table and I'm pinning the 2 fabrics together along the side seam. I'm marking where the pins were with chalk, and a pin through the sequin seam allowance. And now I'm starting at the hem, sewing the side seam allowance of the lining and the sequin mesh together. I'm knotting my thread at each mark and making my way up to the waistband. I also did this at the center back. This should help them stay together a little better. I pinned the lining and the sequin mesh together at the skirt waistband so I can run a stitch through it. Now I'm ready to pin the skirt into the bodice. I'm pinning them together, matching the seams. Then stitching them together. I'll go ahead and do a second row of stitches because the skirt is pretty heavy. All that's left to do now is a bunch of hand sewing. I'm sewing the waist seam up onto the bodice. Then I'm going to attach the sequin and lining seams of the bodice just like I did with the skirt. I've pinned the seams together and now I'm marking the points for alignment. It's a little tricky to get in there, and I'm not going all the way up to the shoulder. Eventually those are all sewn together, and now I can pin the lining at the waist seam. I'm sewing that down with tight little stitches, and my thread is doubled over because the seam is holding the weight of the skirt. At last, that's done. Now a few finishing details. Spikes! I think I got these about 8 years ago and only used a few out of each pack. The finish is all oxidized and distressed. I considered throwing them away more than once, and now I'm glad I didn't. Now the epaulettes have this cool spike fringe, and I left room for one more spike by the pyramid studs. Now I can tack the epaulette down to the shoulder, hiding the stitches under the pyramid studs. And there it is. Thank you for watching my videos. I hope you've learned a few new techniques. I know I learned a few things on this project. Now I just need somewhere to wear this to. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. For the next project, I'm going to get a little more realistic and I'm going to show you how to make your own pattern.